And Ted, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Great to see you all. I'm gonna just share a minute or so about myself. I am from Germany, really. I grew up there, and then I moved to the US 10 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. And let's see, I got exposed to all this sociocracy work because I moved into an intentional community. I live here with 70 neighbors in a co-housing community that uses sociocracy. So that caught my attention because it was different from what I knew from other places. And that seemed exciting. And it was in particular meetings actually that caught my attention. And now let's see, what else is there to know about me? I always say two things. One is I have 5 children. That's important. One of them, I was just sharing before we started, one of them, after being home or in remote school for 53 weeks, started school today. We send her off on one of those yellow school buses that we have here. So let's see, but the others are still doing remote school. And one thing that actually informs my worldview quite a bit, that I'm always happy to share, also just for visibility, is that I'm transgender. So I transitioned a bunch of years ago. And that's interesting because I always, like, something I pay attention to in meetings is gender dynamics. And that's always quite interesting. And that's, of course, one of the many dynamics that is going on in every meeting, right? But that's a particular interesting one to me. And Paula, you will introduce yourself when you speak, so I'm just going to continue. Okay. So the topic for today, as Mirka was saying, hold on, starting share screen will stop other, yes, that's true. I'm stopping the sound share. Okay. Is this, see how to have efficient, effective, and enjoyable meetings? Inspirations from sociocracy. I will say a few words about sociocracy, but really I'm going to hone in on meetings because that's our topic. I guess I want to say something about meetings in general and why I find them important. Is often where we experience each other, right? And so we have that sense of belonging with our team. And I always dream of a world where we get our need for connection and belonging met in our meetings, right? So some people think like, oh, meetings, that's where you have to suffer because that's work and so on, right? And then there's fun, right? There's meetings and there's fun. And to me, especially when we work in places where we care about what we do with people that care about the same things and that we care about, right? The people and the work, then why not have meetings that are actually fun while getting things done? So I guess one of my purpose is to break that, or to break down that belief that that's a distinction, like that you can either have fun or have efficiency in your meetings. I think one can have both, and then you get into that flow state, right? That's fun, that's enjoyable, and that's what I'm going for in meetings as well. So this is my 1-minute introduction into sociocracy. Sociocracy is basically the idea is those who work together decide together. That's what sociocracy means, governance by those who associate together. There's a whole lot more to learn about all of that. And the sweet thing about sociocracy is that it's a system where all the puzzle pieces fit together. It's really exciting when one gets like, oh, this piece actually works because of this piece and so on. So I'm giving you a sliver of it today that applies to meetings. That is a standalone thing, but I just want you to know that there's more. So I will talk some about decision-making, and that's also the piece we will try out. The piece that we will not touch at all actually is organizational structure. So I think of it as decision-making is how we decide, right? Organizational structure is deciding who decides. So that's a little bit different. And then there's improvement over time. But that we will also, well, it always touches a little bit here and there, but not a main focus of today. And if you want to read more about sociocracy overall, here's one good starting point, but you can also just Google it and find all kind of stuff. Let's see. So overview of today. First, I was thinking, what are the pieces that I can just offer you that you can just go do without even having to ever look at all the rest? And those are the three pieces I came up with. One is meeting format, which I find really like an easy way in one can get very instant results with not a lot of magic. Then rounds, which I'll talk about, is a way of speaking that I enjoy a lot, and then just decision making. I will talk mostly about those two things, and Paula will also talk about rounds and just in general a sense of culture in meetings and working together. So let's jump into the first one, meeting format. The reason I care about meeting format and having like a set meeting format is because, as I said, I care about flow. I know you do too. To me, there's one thing in meetings that enhances flow for me, and that is when everybody knows what's happening. Because then you have the safe feeling of, okay, we always do the same thing in the same order. I know exactly where things plug in and so on. I know how this works. Now we can play, right? Because with a solid meeting format, we have a frame where we know everything is taken care of, and we know we're on equal footing with each other. So it both serves my need for efficiency, but also for being equals, because it's not that I plan the meeting and everybody is just trying to follow along, but we all know what's happening. Full transparency. And I since we listened to music at the beginning, to me it's also like knowing your scales and just knowing that and sticking to some boundaries, right, gives us the freedom then to play together. So that's why meeting format is really one of the key pieces and leverage points for me. So let's imagine that we have a bunch of topics we need to talk about. And I just made these up, you know, like we need to hear a report, then somebody send a complaint, and we need to respond something. Maybe there's like a bigger question that we need to think about, like, for example, what are our donor levels? Again, this is made up, let's just imagine. We need to select somebody who serves a certain role, and maybe somebody wrote up a workflow and we need to figure out whether we want to adopt that one. So that's, you know, some sort of bland agenda that could be almost anywhere. Now, this is actually already a very helpful tool that I'm using, and that is what I would call a backlog. It's just a list of agenda items that we at some point need to get to. And it's good if this list always stays around and you can add things and then you can take things off after you talked about them. Some people operate without having that standing to-do list, and then there's always the fear of dropping things, right? Or you have to talk about everything all the time because you don't have a sense of, oh, these are the things we have to get to. Or the question is always who decides what makes it on the agenda. So to have like just a place where you put agenda items like a to-do list, it's really nothing else than that, a to-do list for topics. So let's say we plan a meeting. Cool thing is having a backlog also makes it really easy to plan a meeting, because now you look at your backlog and you say, okay, I guess, oops, that's weird, hold on. Oh, never mind. You, all you need to do is plug those topics into like a basic format. Let me show you the basic format. So this is what that's when I say I want to have like a solid format that's always the same, this is what I'm talking about, this pattern. We always start, and this is thinking about small groups ideally, right? Like groups between 6, 7 people, 5 to 7 people, maybe 8, maybe 10, but we tend to keep things small, which is its own topic. And we just start by arriving with each other. Everybody shares real quick how they are. And that can be super vulnerable, or you just say that you're okay right now. But it's a little bit like the collective version of running into somebody and saying, hey, how are you? You know, just that very basic of acknowledgement of we're human beings in the same room. Let's just hear how we are. And I really like doing it verbally whenever we can, because there's just so much that you can already express in how your voice sounds and so on, right? Just so, again, arriving with each other as human beings. And jumping right into business, to me, is not a time saver, because we skip a step that's actually that glue between us, right? So building that sense of connection and building a sense of psychological safety, to me, is not something that is worth skipping for time reasons. Another, I will not talk about everything for that long, but this is one of the favorite places to me, especially because you can turn around and go start doing it if you're not doing it already. I know many people do, but not everybody. So just say like, hey, let's do a go around where everybody just says 2 sentences about how you're doing right now. I know many actually started this in the pandemic. That's kind of sweet, you know. All of a sudden it became something that you can do, share how you're actually doing. Maybe that's a positive side effect we'll keep. There's one other small, not so small actually, it's like a almost invisible thing that happens with check-ins. If we share in a group how we're doing, everybody gets a quick reminder that other people are also dealing with stuff. So because we tend to be so self-focused, right, and self-centered that we forget, we think that we have issues and other people don't, right? So why are they complaining? But then you hear it of like, oh, you're dealing with this and you're dealing with that. And it's like, okay, you know, there we are, all human beings, you know, all dealing with things. So it's just an amazing equalizer that I wouldn't ever want to miss. Then this I will not go deeply into. It's basically like a checklist, and there's things you can read about that, of just making sure that we're ready as a group. We know who's taking notes and all of that. We know when our next meeting is, things like that. Just making sure our logistics are in order. And then comes what we call setting the agenda, actually also consenting to the agenda, which I'll talk about in a moment, and the agenda topics, and then our backlog. So this is a little bit like a loop that I will talk about in a moment. The checkout is then just closing the loop at the end of, okay, how are you leaving? Is there anything that you're still carrying from the meeting, something that was said, something that you're worried about, like just getting to shared reality again. That's meeting each other as human beings and also just as co-workers in a way. Yeah, let's look at this loop, because I find this one really also a place where we can improve things fairly easily. So I said earlier that we feed our topics. These are the topics that we feed them from this list of to-dos backlog. Yet we decide together how we spend our time. And the way we do that in a Sociocratic meeting is that we explicitly ask for consent. So if I prepare the agenda for our meeting, at the beginning, after all this is done, I will say, okay, here's the agenda as I prepared it. I want to take 10 minutes on this and 15 minutes on that, and then 5 minutes on this. Is everybody okay with that? And that's, again, one of those small looking things that to me is completely transformative for culture, because it's not that the boss, whoever, you know, like the leader of any kind of group in any kind of constellation says how we spend our time, but we do that together, because my time is just worth as much as your time, right? So why would one person decide? It makes no sense, actually, if you think about it. The other piece is that we create an agreement that we can hold each other accountable to. So if we say together 10 minutes on this topic, and then the other important topics, and somebody talks and talks and talks and talks, you can say, we made an agreement. Can we go back to that? So that's an important piece. So now if I'm the person preparing the agenda, all I need to do is fill those slots here, right? The rest always stays the same. So I look at the backlog and I say, for example, hold on, actually, there's something else I want to say. I think about what is it that we want with this agenda item. We just don't just talk about things, like have a plan of where you're heading with this. And we do these things that I'm showing you here. We classify things into 3 different categories. One is report, one is exploration, one is decision. They are very different things. Either somebody tells you something, or you brainstorm something together, you try to problem solve, generate ideas, or you make a decision. Those are all very different, have a very different nature. So this is a report, okay. Then response to Mark's complaint. Here, this made up agenda item, maybe we're just bouncing ideas on what we might be doing. Maybe we're not even deciding anything. Maybe we're just seeing how it landed on people. Donor levels. Maybe we're not ready to make a decision on this one. We're just exploring, well, how could we address this? What could we do about this? But if we're selecting a person, for example, into a role, that's a decision. If we're proving a workflow, that's a decision. So our expectation would be that we walk out the room having made a decision. Again, it's about making agreements with each other. So we have to be clear on what the agreement is. If we talk about this, what are we doing with it? And then we can even put time information on it, right? And now we would just need this and pick, let's say, 3 topics that are timely and plug them into the agenda. Agenda done. And this would be a really solid, super clear, super egalitarian, and super efficient agenda. Because you're arriving with each other, you improve over time because people share in the checkout what could be done better and how they're doing. You set the agenda together, you have an agreement that you operate in, that you can hold each other accountable to, and that you made together, not unilaterally. You have a clear plan. And in this point, I didn't even talk about that. You might harvest from the meeting new questions that came up and you put them on a list already. So now you've bridged your meeting today with all your future meetings. So that's how everything ties together. So this, if we could just do this all the time, everywhere, I think a lot of good things would happen from, would come from that. So I guess, no, I'll talk about that in the summary, but I think the one thing that I think changes things for people quite quickly is having that backlog, that standing to-do list, basically, and a meeting forward, just going through that. Take a deep breath. That was the first topic, the longish topic. And now I want to talk about, okay, so let's say we are having a meeting and we do an exploration or we make a decision, then how do we go about it? Like the big question of who speaks when, and also implied in that, who speaks how much? Because it's been shown that if only a few people speak, typically the people who didn't speak feel drained after the meeting. It's like, okay, there goes so-and-so again on this topic, you know? It does not feel enlivening when that happens. So sharing things as equally as possible and our turns as equally as possible is not only useful for the group's energy and team spirit, I guess, for lack of better words, but it also is actually more efficient, because if only some people speak, there are a lot of ideas you're not hearing. And as far as I know, there's no correlation between how good an idea is and whether the person who has the idea is introvert or extrovert. It just happens to be that we somehow trust the people who are more likely to speak up, which has no basis. So let's try and equalize it a little bit at least. And one thing that we do here is something that I tried to symbolize with this is doing rounds. And I've already referred to that when I talked about checking in, like the opening round, talking one by one. And that's really all the magic there is to it. If you can get a group or a team during a meeting to just share things one by one, like for example, let's say we have 6 people in the room. Let's say I'm facilitating. I would start maybe with the 3rd person in, like, counting from me. And then the 4th person speaks, and so on, 5th, and then maybe it's my turn, and then the people next to me. And that way, we can be sure that everybody knows their voice matters. We hear all the good ideas. We create something that's psychologically safe, because everybody can speak without fearing that somebody's gonna jump on them, right? Or say, but that doesn't work because, and that kind of stuff, you know, like nobody shoots things down, because we just speak one by one, and we tend to keep interruptions super, super minimal. Maybe there's sometimes that are like, oh, sorry, I didn't get what you said, kind of thing, but not like, oh, this can't be done, kind of like, not dissent. That's not the time for it. And I always feel like when we do that, like speaking in a round, that it has more of a feel like we're all bringing our offering and bringing it to the center of the group. That's what it feels like to me. And I absolutely love that. You know, it's not that we have this, like against energy or like two people who get into a back and forth and back and forth. It's like we all offer it to the middle and then we see together what comes from it. And it feels very peaceful to me. But this is where I'm stopping actually, or I'm pausing, I should say, and I'm gonna pass it on to Paula, who's been using some of these tools, or many of these tools actually, at her school, and wanted to share some of her experience because, hold on, because you might be listening to me thinking like, come on, for real, does it make such a big difference? So over to Paula, and I will stop sharing, correct? So that people can see you. I think that's a good idea. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ted. I love listening to you because every time I revisit these principles, something new reveals itself to me, and I'm taking notes here furiously. So thank you for inviting me in, Marika, to Hershey Montessori School. Just a quick orientation to us. We're a school of serving children from infancy in a parent-infant program all the way through a high school. And we're two campuses, one Montessori school, but two campuses. We are a complex living system of parents and their infants and their needs, and second plane and third plane, a boarding school, a working Montessori farm school, and 75 staff. And in March 2020, we had 287 students from infancy to age 18. So I looked at the complexity of our school, and I feel that that interdependence of 75 staff members and all those adolescents and children, I felt it was like the mycelia under our feet. The interdependency of this web and this network, and all of us with this great passion of creating these optimal environments for human life to grow and to create these conditions where optimal development could fulfill itself. And get all those passionate Montessorians in a room together. I'm sure you all have experienced this. We have this shared common mission, and yet with all this complexity and these different needs, we were not always at our best as adults. And Dr. Montessori described in the book Childhood to Adolescence that we must provide the environment for the adolescents to be a school of experience in the elements of social life. And I was yearning for how we might be better together as adults to be able to really embody and live out and model these elements of social life with our students. So if some of the things I was trying to move away from, I was in meetings all the time. I was exhausted, but I wanted to be in every levels meeting and in every decision-making group because I was wanting everything to go well. I wanted harmony, and I wanted the staff to be happy. And because I really wanted to be responsible for all the decisions that we were really doing the best thing. And I was personally depleted. And when I wanted harmony, what I was trying to move away from was any power over of one dominant voice in the group, or unspoken needs and unmet needs and hurt feelings or derailed agendas. And I saw that this was not going to work well as our school was growing when we added the high school. And I also noticed that change was very hard to bring any change to the school. And some people in meetings were afraid to bring up opposing ideas. So we were getting stuck in groupthink. And so people were confusing harmony with no dissent. And I was really struggling with that. So thanks to Laureen Golden, a dear friend and a Sociocracy for All member, and Ted Rao, we brought in Ted to present an introduction to sociocracy to our whole school. And almost a third of the staff voluntarily signed up for more training on how to apply these principles. And through the SOFA, Sociocracy for All website, we people could actually access this training in a very affordable way and in a very easy way to meet people's schedules. And they learned these skills, and I can't tell you how grateful I am during this pandemic. If we didn't have these skills, my goodness, it was a life jacket for our school. And as a result now, because of the way we structure our meetings, and we have a whole new culture. It's a culture of truly great connection. And when Ted was speaking about rounds and turn taking, I grew up in a Quaker background, you know, 8 years in a Quaker boarding school in Ireland. There's a lot of silence and listening. When you're in rounds, you know your turn is coming to speak. And so you can let go that idea. You don't have to keep holding it, and you're actually able to really listen more deeply. And when I'm in a round and I'm listening to other people speak, and I know my turn is coming, I hear something that they are saying that I would not have heard before. And it changes what I go, oh, having heard what you just said, this is bringing up a different thing for me. And dissent has a place, so we can have opposing ideas and keep going in rounds until all needs are met, or what we say is good enough for now, safe enough to try. And in those meetings, the built-in evaluation process, as Ted was mentioning, the format and the structure, having a check-out round at the end of a meeting, people know that if there's something not going really well or there's an unmet need, there's a built-in expectation, an opportunity for evaluation and feedback. What might we do better in our next meeting together? And during the need to suddenly transform our school and do Montessori online, something none of us were trained for, the stress and pressure and the emotional discombobulation of everybody was so superly helped by this relationship and connection that we have. And I credit to nonviolent communication, because we discovered that through our sociocracy journey. And then many of us did much nonviolent communication training as well. But in our evaluative checkout rounds now, and the teachers had to redesign how we were going to come back to school together in the fall with 6-foot distancing and 3-year-olds and masks, and don't touch any of the materials without sanitizing. And how are we going to redesign this? I could give up control. I didn't have to go to all the meetings anymore, because I could trust that they had the skills they needed to have every voice heard, and that there would be no derailing agendas and power over. And we had so much trust together that when we did our evaluation rounds, the theme that kept coming back up was all of the staff saying, I feel more connected to this community than ever. And I couldn't ask for a better feeling. And now there's much more creativity and flow in our school. We can design things, we try new things. We know there's built-in evaluation. So don't, you know, it's a much more harmonious place. And so I'm just very grateful for Ted, and I'd be happy to answer questions later. Thank you, Ted. You can pick up from here.
Thank you, Paula. I always get a little embarrassed when I hear all those things, but take it from her. I'm glad to have this other voice, which is, by the way, one of the principles that we do when we like report from a different, like, let's say one team reports to another team, we tend to have 2 people in the room. I always feel the advantage right here. Like, you know, for me, this is palpable right now. I'm glad that there's 2 voices here. Okay. So rounds and culture with each other, quality of listening. There comes the moment when we need to make a decision, right? And I want to talk about consent and decision making, the third topic of my presentation here. And I will talk a little bit about the definition of consent, but also about how to get there. Because getting places is not so easy, right? Typically, excuse my slight sarcasm here, but typically this is what it looks like, it feels like, when a group is trying to make a decision, like, oh, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this, and then you sort of go in circles, and then at some point something comes out of it. That often groups actually hold on to that, and they tell me, no, we want to speak like that because it feels creative, you know? It's like, yeah, maybe. What I notice is that often this lacks clarity in many different places. And And I think there's a place for sort of this kind of creative, somewhat aimless meandering. But what I want to offer as an overall thought is the following. Maybe the way could also be like that. So what I'm going to explain what I mean by this. So often what we do, just as a general pattern, this is not even inherently sociocratic or anything, but it's a pattern that I noticed is really useful. And that is with rounds, right? Like, let's say there's a question, like, what should be our donor level? So whatever, right? What should we respond to Mike's complaint? Doing a round and then another round and then making a proposal. The reason I want to do 2 rounds is because in the first round, I hear people's ideas. And in the second round, people can bounce off of each other. So here's where we hear people's first impression and their first original ideas and so on. And for example, if you look at groupthink and how it's unhealthy if everybody just runs in the same direction together because they reinforce each other. This is a good idea to just really emphasize how people have different perspectives, but there is also a place of not necessarily convergence, but alignment, I guess, right? We don't have to walk away thinking the same thing, but at least we know about each other and we know how our views relate to each other. So that's where this happens, like the collective sense making. Yet, sometimes people wish that after this second round, or even if you do things like this, people still hope and cross their fingers that somehow everybody will be on the same page. Because that's what we want, right? We don't want to say no to people. We don't want to say, well, tough luck, this is what we're doing. So then sometimes groups do this like informal consensus kind of thing, I guess. Sometimes voting because they don't know what else to do, right? Because at some point you have to move. So it's like, okay, let's just vote. But neither the informal consensus nor the voting really feels like satisfactory, because in voting, of course, you can have almost half of the people be absolutely opposed to something you're going to carry out together. That doesn't seem like a good idea. It's not sustainable as a strategy. And in informal, at least in informal consensus, I've seen just quite a bit that people like in this kind of meandering, then at some point says, well, it seems like everybody's on the same page that we're going to do this and that. So let's just do that. People are like, what? Hold on. No, like that's never like, so sort of people read the room and sometimes gloss over things. Again, that's an informal consensus. So if there's no explicit question, which is, I think, informal consensus is the most standard approach, like standard decision-making method in groups. So anyway, sorry for the back and forth here. But here is something I'm offering from sociocracy, like the standard decision-making method here is consent. And what does that mean? It starts with the aim, the shared purpose that we have. So we would typically, for every group, define of why are we in the room? Like what is our contribution to the organization overall? And that could be all kinds of things, right? It could be running a fundraising campaign, or it could be providing the schedule or whatever. So something very specific, we know what we're doing. And then if somebody has a proposal, the question is, does the proposal support the aim, that shared purpose? And if somebody says, no, we can't achieve the aim like this because our proposal actually is not going to do it, it's just going to create some negative side effects, or it's simply not a good enough, like it simply don't believe that it's going to do what it's supposed to do. In that case, you would object. You would say, no, I'm sorry, this is not going to work. And I'm trying out a new thing. Typically, I talk about consent first, and I thought, why not talk about objections first? But now we talk about consent. If you say this proposal supports the aim, yes, sure, yes. I mean, there's no harm. I guess I can totally do what I'm supposed to do with this proposal. Or if you say, oh, this is absolutely perfect, all I ever wanted, that means you consent. The key point here is there's 2 key points, actually. One is, you don't only just agree because you think something is the best idea. You can also just give your consent to something where you're like, sure, that's like, yeah, that's going to work. You don't have to be in love with it. You don't have to get your personal preference for working with something. But if you can't work with something, if there is an actual reason where you say, no, there's going to be harm, harm is a big word. Like this is going to interfere with what we're doing, then I would want people to object, because why wouldn't they? Right? And we always carry this view of objections being something negative or something risky socially and so on. And I always remind people of, okay, you're all in the same room because you all care about your shared purpose, your aim. Somebody who you work with is telling you this proposal is going to negatively impact what we do. What reason on earth would there be not to say, thank you, please tell us what it is? It just, once you think that way, the old way of thinking of objections as something bad and so on just doesn't make sense anymore. It just, I can't even believe that I used to think that way, that objections were something bad. And it is actually not something that I'm just saying. I experience this in groups, that really people who transition sort of to this mindset, they perk up, like they perk up when somebody says they have an objection. Like, oh, you have an objection? I'm really curious now. I even know groups that celebrate every objection that comes, because now we have the chance of making something better. And we can celebrate that somebody had the guts to speak up, because that shows us that our group dynamic is healthy, right? If somebody dares to speak up and say, I'm going to put my foot down here, that's a reason to celebrate. So there is a very, very shortcut to explaining consent that I like, and I always have to use my poor kids for it. It just shows you a little bit of the shift in thinking, and I think it's a good example that seems to work for people. So here it is. It's not a perfect example, by the way, because it's a family example, and families don't have declared aims, so it's a little wishy-washy, but it works. So if I ask my kids, what do you want for lunch? They will probably scream all kinds of different things. And the problem is, if I ask, what do you want for lunch? I've set the expectation that the solution will be in the, this is perfect space. This is what I want space for everybody. But I can tell you from experience, there is no such food that is perfect for everybody in my family. Therefore, I've now made the task on, like, this is something you can't win. There is no solution. The moment you ask the question, there is no solution. You've basically maneuvered yourself into a dead end, if you're in my family at least. Now, consent turns the question around. It says, okay, you make a proposal. Let's say I propose, rice and beans. And now I don't ask, do you want rice and beans? I ask, is there any reason not to have rice and beans? Because now the people who say, I want a pizza, but this is fine, they're not even gonna object. Like, no, they're not gonna say something. They might still say, oh, I want a pizza, but fine. But the people who do have a reason, and we could all make up reasons of what could be the case here, but if there is an actual reason, I've explicitly asked for it. Like, please tell me the reason of, why rice and beans don't work. So you're doing basically both. You're making it more possible to make a decision, and you're being super respectful towards objections because you explicitly ask for them, you invite them. So it's a really sweet way of having that both and of, no, we're going to move forward with something, right? We're not going to just talk and talk and talk and not get anywhere. And you're being super explicit, but you're also very inviting of dissent. So I really love that combination. It's of course something that doesn't only live in processes and in words, but also in people's mindset. But most people can make their way there, actually. So now, in order to do this, there is a sort of tried and tested kind of way of doing it that we really like. That is 3 steps. So in rice and beans, it's not so complicated, but let's say we have something more complicated. We would first need to make sure that everybody understands my proposal. Again, rice and beans is not a complicated proposal, but they're quick questions, right? For example, what my kids would ask is, do the beans have onions in them? That seems to be a key deal breaker in my family still. But that would be the level of a clarifying question, right? if the question is, the proposal is more complicated, like I propose to spend $2,000 on this or that, on the new website for this conference or whatever, then somebody could say, oh, could you say more about what's entailed by that? That's a clarifying question. And of course, we want everybody to understand the proposal, because if they say yes to proposal, they never understood what their yeses were not so much, right? We want people to be on the same page. So that's a key step. Then reactions. That's at least in important decisions, we then do one of our rounds that we love so much, and hearing everybody's reaction of, what do you think about this idea? And then we go to, okay, now I want to hear, do you consent? Is this good enough to start doing? Or is an objection that we need to look at? And in this moment, there is no standing aside, no, oh, decide that without me, just I want to know, are you co-responsible, or is the reason that this is not good enough? It's somewhat of a binary choice. If you don't care, you can just, that means you don't have an objection, which means you consent. So this now, let's see. Hold on, let me look. I'm not quite. Oh, there's one other little thing that I wanted to say, because this difference of clarifying questions and reactions and consent versus objection is actually super useful in terms of clarity of what we're saying and why we're saying things. And here's another little story. Somebody who has been married for 50 years, is my understanding, they're in their 70s. They both learned about sociocracy and got really excited about one particular thing that they told me about. And it was that they had all of a sudden better clarity in their communication with each other, because they would have exchanges like this. Oh, let's have lunch in the garden. But what about your allergies? It could be all kinds of stuff. I think the example was actually, hey, let's go to the art exhibition on Saturday. And the other one says, oh, but what about, this other thing that we had planned? So if we look at this could be a clarifying question. Right, could be like, hey, have you already taken your allergy drug? Or it could be, your allergy is not bad today, like you think this is going to work. That's great, like, just like tell me, like, give me information. That's what a clarifying question is. Reactions, not just reactions, thoughts and feelings flowing through us, they mean things, and sometimes they don't mean all that much. So it could be just a reaction of, oh, like, I'm worried about your allergies or whatever, but if you say so, fine. Or it could be an objection. Maybe more if it's about my allergies, that introduces a whole different element, but that's, but you get the idea. This could be, no, like, hold on, this is not going to work. You're going to suffer for hours afterwards with the allergies. So the point of that is, you can see how we're sloppy in our communication, right? And what this couple, Roger and Pat, what they told me was that after interchanges like that, where typically they would go into an argument because somebody interpreted it whatever they thought was sort of the least best intention you could assume. And instead now, they told me, they smile and say, well, was it a clarifying question, a reaction, or objection? And it's like, oh, actually this was a reaction. Oh, okay, so you consent. Yes. So it's a really there's also the humorous element in it, I guess, but I think the main piece is clarity, because most of our tensions, as we all know, come from lack of clarity. So this is, I think, Mirka, where you wanted to say, we either do super quick questions or we release the people who need to go. You say what you wanted to say.
Yes. Can you stop sharing just a moment?
Yes.
I think this would be the time for us to go into breakout rooms and to stop the streaming and sharing on Facebook. So Tamás, please. But before you stop it, Tamás, let me just say that for those of you who are watching on Facebook, you can go to leadmontessori.com for more information, or to sociocracyforall.org for more information.